So imagine you are an elite bodyguard. You are stationed in the ancient Near East, serving a king who has held this totally unchallenged, iron-fisted power over a subjugated people for 18 years.
Yeah, 18 long years. That's a long
Right.
time to get comfortable.
Exactly. And your entire life revolves around protocols, right? Security checks, standard operating procedures.
You know the drill.
Right. And you are standing outside your king's private upper chamber. You've just watched him lock the doors from the inside to have this private audience with a lone, seemingly unarmed messenger.
Which is unusual, but not impossible.
Yeah, but then 10 minutes go by, then 20, and you hear absolutely nothing.
Just dead silent.
Just silence. You're starting to get anxious, maybe a little embarrassed, like, is he asleep? Is he sick?
But you definitely don't knock.
No way.
Yeah.
Because violating royal decorum could mean your head. But what you don't know, and what you couldn't possibly imagine in that moment, is that your king is already dead on the floor.
Yeah, it's a completely wild scenario.
And his assassin. He is currently making a grueling, completely invisible escape by crawling down through the palace's royal cesspit.
I mean, it sounds like a scene ripped straight out of a modern espionage thriller, right? You have a zero-day exploit of a security system and a highly unconventional exfiltration.
It really does. But we aren't talking about a Hollywood script today.
No, we are talking about a historical event from the 14th century BC, the assassination of the Moabite king Eglon by an Israelite operative named Ehud.
So, welcome to you, the listener, to today's deep dive. We are wading right into what I can only really describe as forensic muddy waters.
Very muddy, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah, exactly. Our mission today is to prove a very specific point, which is that absolutely nothing is as it seems in the ancient book of Judges.
And archaeology is just uncovering a bit of its delightful and honestly instructive mysteries.
We've already covered the closing chapters of the book in a previous deep dive, as well as the whole, the bee lightning goad combination of Deborah's stint.
Which was fascinating in its own right.
Oh, totally. But here we really want to dig deep into the theological and historical dimensions of Ehud's exploit.
We need to relate those practical spiritual inferences to contemporary situations, as well as to redemptive history from the woman's seed.
Yes, that is exactly where we are going. We are going to deconstruct this narrative, not as a simplistic fable where the good guy just points his sword and wins, but as a highly sophisticated, historically accurate account of a covert intelligence operation.
And to pull this off, we have an incredible stack of sources in front of us.
We really do. We are looking at a comprehensive archaeological and linguistic study by Dr. Brian Janeway from Bible and Spade.
Right. And we are also layering in excavation records from Jericho, specifically John Garstang's Middle Building dig.
Alongside the findings from Tel Eton and the City of David, we are basically treating these ancient texts and archaeological digs as a cold case file.
Which is the best way to approach it, honestly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Before we can understand the assassin and how he pulled off this impossible hit, we have to understand the geopolitical battlefield he was operating in.
Yeah, to understand the operative, you have to understand the suffocating environment that made his specific set of skills completely necessary.
Right, because you don't just send in a guy like Ehud for a standard political dispute.
No, not at all. We are looking at the era of the Judges, which covers a roughly 350-year span of history.
So from circa 1400 BC to about 1050 BC, right?
Exactly. Right before the establishment of the Israelite monarchy under King Saul. And if you read through the historical records of this era, the narrative flow follows a very strict, almost mechanical, cyclical pattern.
It's basically a sociological loop that just keeps repeating over and over again.
Yeah, it starts with the people experiencing a period of blessing and prosperity.
But inevitably, that comfort leads to spiritual complacency.
Always. They get comfortable, they assimilate with the surrounding cultures, and that complacency breeds idolatry.
And that internal spiritual decay translates directly into geopolitical weakness.
Which invites oppression by foreign powers. They suffer under occupation, they finally hit rock bottom, they repent, and a judge is raised up to deliver them.
And then the cycle starts all over again. But the language used to describe this deliverance is where we hit our first major misconception, isn't it?
It really is. When modern English speakers hear the word judge, a very specific image comes to mind.
Yeah, we picture a courtroom. We picture a magistrate in black robes banging a gavel, making legal pronouncements over property disputes or criminal cases.
Right. But the ancient Hebrew root word used here is sepiti, And translating stepped merely as judge in the modern legal sense is entirely too narrow.
It completely distorts the historical reality of what these individuals were actually doing.
Exactly. It paints the wrong picture entirely.
Because when I try to picture Ehud based on this text, a guy in a robe sitting behind a wooden bench makes zero sense for what he actually does.
Right. He's not mediating a property line dispute.
So if the English translation is painting the wrong picture, what does spet actually mean in its original context?
Well, we have to look at how the word operates across the broader ancient Near East. The root spet is used 180 times in the Old Testament, and it encompasses a massive dynamic range of actions.
Like what kind of actions?
It means to deliver, to save, to govern, to vindicate. We obviously see cognates for this exact word in Akkadian and in the ancient Mari archives.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In those cultures, the term is highly action-oriented. Contrast that with another Hebrew root word, din.
Right. I've heard of din.
Din is a word that implies strict legal courtroom judgment, the exact thing we moderns think of. But din is used only 25 times in the text.
Wow, 25 versus 180.
Exactly. By using stet 180 times, the historical record is basically shouting at us that individuals like Ehud are not courtroom lawyers.
They are military deliverers.
Yes, they are governors who rescue their people through physical, often violent intervention.
That distinction completely rewires how we should view the protagonist of this story. He's not a magistrate issuing subpoenas.
Not at all.
He's an operative, a general, a tactical asset. But before we get into his specific operation, there's a massive academic debate about the timeline of this entire era that we need to address.
Oh, the chronology debate. Yeah, that changes the stakes of the story entirely.
Right, because modern scholarship often tries to squeeze this whole 350-year period down into a much shorter window, don't they?
They do. There is a very strong push in certain academic circles to compress the events of the Judges era into a much shorter period of about 200 years.
And what's their justification for that?
Well, the argument usually hinges on the idea that these cycles of oppression and deliverance might have been strictly regional and happening simultaneously rather than sequentially.
Okay, but if you analyze the internal claims of the ancient texts themselves, they vehemently defend the longer 350-year timeline.
They do. For instance, in Judges 11:26, a later judge named Jephthah explicitly negotiates with a foreign king by citing that the Israelites had already been occupying the land for 300 years.
And later on, in 1 Kings 6:1, the text cites an exact figure of 480 years from the time of the exodus out of Egypt to the construction of Solomon's temple.
Right. The internal chronology is remarkably consistent if you just let it speak for itself.
You know, whenever I hear about scholars trying to arbitrarily shrink historical timelines, it reminds me of a studio executive trying to fit a dense, 1,000-page epic novel into a 90-minute movie.
Just to make it more digestible for a modern audience.
Exactly. But you lose all the weight of the story. And to you, listening to this, understanding this extended timeline is absolutely crucial for understanding the stakes.
It really gives immense suffocating weight to the 18 years of Moabite oppression under King Eglon before Ehud even enters the picture.
18 years isn't a brief skirmish.
No, that is an entire generation growing up under a hostile foreign occupation.
That is 18 years of farmers having their crops confiscated as tribute, 18 years of local economies being bled dry, 18 years of systemic humiliation.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the oppression wasn't some random geopolitical misfortune. It was the direct, calculated consequence of that cycle of complacency we discussed earlier.
Right. The Israelites compromised their identity, grew complacent, and the Moabite king Eglon capitalized on that weakness.
He crossed the Jordan River, set up his base of operations in the city of Palms, which is Jericho, and subjugated them.
So this 18-year occupation sets the stage for a desperately needed deliverer.
But conventional warfare was completely off the table.
Because they were totally outgunned.
Exactly. The Israelites were outgunned, disarmed, and occupied. A standard military response would have been an absolute bloodbath.
So if they couldn't use a hammer, they needed a scalpel. They needed an asymmetrical advantage.
And that's exactly what the tribe of Benjamin provided.
Okay, let's look at the operative himself. Who is Ehud, and why was he the perfect asset for this seemingly impossible mission?
Ehud is explicitly identified as belonging to the tribe of Benjamin. Now, the name Benjamin itself contains a glaring irony in this context.
Irony how?
Well, in Hebrew, Benjamin literally translates to son of the right hand.
Okay, son of the right hand.
It's a title denoting honor, strength, and standard military prowess. Yet, in the very same breath that the text introduces him as a son of the right hand, it points out his defining physical trait.
Which is that Ehud is left-handed.
Exactly. The specific Hebrew phrase used is iter yad yemino, which translates literally to bound in his right hand or right hand bound.
Right hand bound. To modern ears, that almost sounds like a physical disability, as if his right arm was withered or useless.
I know, it sounds like an injury. But historically speaking, this wasn't a disability at all. It was his greatest tactical asset.
Far from a disability.
To understand why being left-handed was such a devastating advantage, we have to look at the biomechanics of ancient military formations.
Okay, let's break that down. Picture a traditional ancient shield wall.
Right, infantry soldiers are trained from youth to hold their heavy defensive shield on their left arm and their primary weapon, a sword or a spear, in their right hand.
So the entire formation, the entire defensive posture of an army, and the muscle memory of every individual guard is programmed to fight a right-handed opponent.
Exactly. If I'm a palace guard, my shield on my left arm protects my torso, and I'm expecting the attacker's weapon to strike against that shield.
Because that's standard blade against shield combat.
Right. But if a left-handed warrior approaches, it scrambles that entire defensive geometry.
The left-handed attacker's weapon is coming from an angle where the guard's shield isn't covering.
It places the attacker's blade directly against the guard's unshielded weapon arm, bypassing the shield entirely.
Wow.
It's an angle the guard's muscle memory has never been trained to defend against.
And the historical records confirm that this wasn't just a quirk of genetics for Ehud, do they?
No, it was a highly cultivated, lethal martial art within his specific tribe.
Right, because later in the same book, Judges 2016 mentions a specialized unit of 700 picked Benjamite troops who were also iter right-hand bound.
And the text notes that every one of them could sling a stone at a hair and not miss.
Which implies that the tribe of Benjamin intentionally trained left-handed shock troops.
Ehud wasn't a disabled man doing his best. He was an elite special forces operator possessing an asymmetrical physical advantage.
It's the ancient equivalent of a cybersecurity hacker finding a zero-day exploit in a corporate firewall.
That is a perfect analogy. The firewall in this case, Eglon's palace security detail, has standard operating procedures.
Right. When visitors approach the king, the guards search their left thigh, because that is where a standard right-handed swordsman would strap his weapon to draw it across his body.
But Ehud crafts a double-edged sword, exactly a cubit long, which is about 18 inches.
And he straps it to his right thigh under his cloak.
Right. He walks right through their pat-down, bypassing their physical security protocols entirely because he is using their own assumptions against them.
The guard's standard operating procedure was his camouflage.
Exactly. But bypassing the physical pat-down is only the first phase of the operation.
Because having a hidden weapon inside the compound doesn't do any good if you can't get alone with a high-value target.
Right. Ehud needed to manipulate King Eglon into dismissing his security detail, and he executes this through a masterful piece of psychological warfare.
The pretext for Ehud's entry into the palace is the delivery of the annual tribute.
Yes, and after 18 years of occupation, this isn't just a guy handing over a bag of gold.
No, this would have been a massive, humiliating logistical train. We are talking carts of grain, livestock, agricultural produce.
Brought by a large entourage of Israelites to the Moabite king.
So Ehud delivers this massive tribute, leaves the palace with his entourage to begin the journey home, but once they reach the statues or idols near Gilgal, he turns back alone.
He approaches the palace guards, requests an audience with Eglon, and claims he has a secret message for the king.
And this is where the linguistic choices reveal the trap, right?
The linguistics here are absolutely brilliant. When Ehud gets back into the king's presence, he announces, "I have a message from God for you, O king."
But the scholar Arthur Kundal makes a vital observation about the specific word Ehud uses, doesn't he?
Yes, Kundal points out that Ehud does not use the specific covenantal Israelite name for God, which is Yahweh.
Instead, he uses the much more generic, universally understood term Elohim.
Right. And if we think about the psychology of a foreign occupier, that choice of words is everything.
Because if Ehud had walked in and said, "I have a secret message from Yahweh," Eglon's defenses would have instantly spiked.
Absolutely. Yahweh is the localized deity of the people Eglon is currently enslaving. A message from Yahweh implies a threat, a curse, or an impending judgment.
The guards would have drawn their swords immediately.
But by using Elohim, Ehud uses a broad, generic term for the divine realm or the pantheon of gods.
Which is a concept Eglon, as a polytheistic Moabite, was very comfortable with.
It completely disarmed the king's suspicion. In fact, it played directly into his ego. Well, Eglon hears Elohim and thinks, the divine realm recognizes my greatness and is trying to communicate with me through this subjugated messenger.
Wow. It lowered his psychological defenses so effectively that Eglon actually commanded silence and ordered all of his personal bodyguards out of the room.
Just so he could hear this divine oracle in absolute privacy.
It is stunning. Ehud bypassed the physical security by weaponizing his left-handedness against their search protocols.
And then he bypassed the psychological security by weaponizing generic religious terminology against the king's own narcissism.
And so now he is completely alone with the target. But to really grasp how the execution and the subsequent escape happen, we can't just imagine this taking place in a generic stone room.
No, not at all.
We have to reconstruct the physical crime scene. Here's where it gets really interesting. We have to look at the dirt under the fingernails archaeology to understand the architecture of this trap.
Architecture is the linchpin of this entire account.
So what does this palace actually look like?
To visualize the space Ehud just infiltrated, we look to what archaeologists classify as the Bit Halani palace structure.
Bit Halani.
Yes. This is a very specific, well-attested architectural floor plan found in Syrian, Assyrian, and contemporary Levantine Iron Age structures.
Roughly dating from 1200 to 500 BC, but with roots stretching back further, right?
Exactly.
You know, when I try to picture an ancient palace, my mind automatically goes to massive, sprawling courtyards with hundreds of rooms, almost like a medieval European castle.
Right, like something out of a fantasy novel.
Yeah. But this Bit Halani structure sounds much more deliberate and contained. Draw the floor plan in our minds. What does Eglon's seat of power actually look like?
A Bit Halani palace is characterized by a very specific sequence of spaces. At the front of the building, you have a large pillared portico.
So essentially a grand covered porch area.
Right. This is where the guards would be stationed and where public business or tribute reception might begin.
Okay, I can picture that.
Immediately behind that portico, running parallel to it, is the inner throne room. And the defining feature of this throne room is that it is a broad room.
A broad room.
Yeah, you don't enter on the short side and look down a long hall like a cathedral. You enter through the long, broad wall, and the room stretches out wide to your left and right.
So it's a wide, relatively shallow room.
Exactly.
If you step through the doors from the portico, the king is positioned somewhere along that wide expanse, meaning he doesn't have a deep hall to retreat into if someone makes it past the threshold.
Correct. He's right there. And the most crucial feature of this specific throne room is where the king actually sits.
Where is that?
In Bit Halani architecture, the core of the throne room, the royal seat, is elevated on a raised platform.
Like a stage.
Yes. We see this architectural concept of elevated sacred or royal space elsewhere in the ancient Near East.
Like King Solomon's throne.
Exactly. Solomon's throne was highly elevated, and the Holy of Holies in the Jerusalem temple was elevated 10 cubits above the main floor.
The elevation signifies authority, but it also creates a distinct separate space within the larger room.
It draws a clear boundary.
And we aren't just talking about abstract architectural theories here either. The sources point out that archaeology has actually unearthed a physical structure that matches this exact profile.
In the exact geographical location where this story takes place.
Right. We have physical evidence that brings this text to life.
In 1933, the renowned archaeologist John Garstang was excavating on the southeastern slope of ancient Jericho.
Which is the city of palms where Eglon had set up his headquarters.
Yes. And Garstang uncovered what he termed the Middle Building.
And what did that building show?
Well, the stratigraphy and dating of the structure correspond beautifully to the late 14th century BC, which, by the way, aligns perfectly with the longer 350-year chronology of the Judges timeline we discussed earlier.
And it wasn't just a random house. It was clearly an administrative command center, wasn't it?
It was an isolated palatial structure built on a grand scale. The artifacts found inside paint a clear picture of its function.
What kind of artifacts?
Garstang's team found a cuneiform clay tablet, which indicates administrative record-keeping and bureaucracy.
Okay, so a government building.
They also found expensive, imported Cypriot pottery, which points to a wealthy, elite resident who had the power to command trade goods from across the Mediterranean.
So this was definitely a seat of power.
But the real smoking gun isn't just the wealth of the building, it's the lifespan of the occupation.
Right, the timeline of how long they were actually there.
The archaeological record demonstrates that this middle building was occupied for only a very short, intense period of time before being completely abandoned.
Abandoned, not destroyed.
Exactly. It wasn't destroyed in a massive fiery siege, it was just vacated.
Which aligns flawlessly with the historical record of an 18-year occupation by Eglon.
Followed by his sudden assassination, which triggered the immediate rout of the Moabite forces out of Jericho by the Israelites.
It was built to project power, used briefly to collect tribute, and then suddenly emptied.
To add geographical context, excavations at Telion, also known as Khirbet Oten, have been identified by some scholars as the ancient town of Eglon, sitting at a strategic crossroads below the Hebron Hills.
When you layer the linguistics, the geography, and the physical excavations at Jericho together, the ancient text reads like a perfectly preserved forensic report.
It really does. It's incredibly detailed.
So keeping that archaeology in mind, let's step back into the shoes of the operative. Ehud is standing inside the broad throne room of this Bit Halani palace.
And the guards have been dismissed to the outer pillared portico.
Right. The scholar Baruch Halpern proposes a specific architectural theory about that elevated platform where Eglon is sitting, which sets up the mechanics of the assassination perfectly.
Yes. Alpin, analyzing the structural norms of the period, suggests that the elevated platform in Eglon's throne room wasn't just an open stage visible to everyone in the hall.
Okay, so it wasn't just a platform everyone could stare at.
No, it was highly likely partitioned off from the main audience hall by a wooden lattice screen or partition.
Creating a room within a room.
Exactly. This architectural feature creates a secluded, private space right there in the main hall. The king could look out, but he was physically separated from the general audience space.
So Eglon is sitting up on this elevated, screened-off platform. Ehud approaches, crosses the threshold through that wooden partition, and they are now totally isolated from the guards outside.
Just the two of them.
This brings us to the climax of the chronological sequence, the execution and the locked door. Ehud is inside this space, but trying to pinpoint the exact geography of the room using the Hebrew text has sparked intense academic debate over the centuries.
It has. The debate centers around a single highly contested Hebrew noun found in Judges 3:20, the aliyah.
The aliyah.
For generations, traditional English translations have rendered this word as cool upper chamber, or sometimes as portico or an outside stairway.
A cool upper chamber. That phrase immediately paints a picture in your mind of a breezy, shaded room built on the flat roof of the palace, designed to catch the evening wind.
And that is exactly how early scholars like Gray, Bowling, and Martin interpreted it.
They envisioned a lightweight, pavilion-style construction situated on the building's flat roof, meant as a retreat from the brutal, oppressive heat of the Jordan Valley.
Right. But structurally, architecturally, and logically, that interpretation simply doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
Why not? I mean, if Jericho is sweltering, why wouldn't the king build a room on the roof to cool off?
Because of how thermal mass works in ancient architecture.
Thermodynamics in ancient palaces. I love this.
You do not escape the blistering 110-degree midday heat of the Jericho Valley by going up to the roof, closer to the sun, in a lightweight structure.
Oh, right. Heat rises.
Exactly. To cool off in antiquity, you go down. You seek respite in the lower interior levels of the building where the massive stone walls are thickest and the shade is deepest.
A roof chamber would have been an oven during the day.
A complete bake oven.
Okay, so if logic and thermodynamics rule out a roof chamber, what is the aliyah? Where is Ehud actually standing?
Newer, much more rigorous scholarship, championed by scholars like Halpern and Lawrence Steger, looks deeper into the etymology of aliyah.
And what do they find?
They argue it should be understood as the room over the beams.
The room over the beams.
They point to the architectural usage in places like Psalm 104, verse 3, which poetically describes Yahweh laying the beams of his upper chambers in the waters.
Ah, okay.
In the context of a Bit Halani palace, the aliyah isn't a room on the roof. It is that screened-off elevated platform we just discussed, which was literally built over the floor beams of the main throne room.
So Ehud steps up into this secluded, elevated aliyah to deliver his secret message.
Right.
And that message, of course, is the 18-inch double-edged sword hidden on his right thigh.
Eglon, expecting a divine oracle, stands up out of respect for the word of Elohim.
Ehud reaches across with his left hand, draws the sword from his right side, a motion Eglon wouldn't instinctively recognize as an attack until it was too late.
Because of the muscle memory we talked about earlier.
Exactly. and he drives it into the corpulent king with such force that the hilt sinks in after the blade. The text notes that Eglon's fat closes over the blade, and Ehud leaves the weapon entirely inside the body. The tyrant falls.
It's a brutal scene.
Very brutal. But what happens next is where the text gives us a locked door mystery.
Yes.
The text says Ehud leaves the Aliyah and locks the doors. But did he lock them from the inside or the outside?
This is a phenomenal linguistic detail that changes the entire escape narrative. We have to examine the Hebrew root verb sghr,
SGHR.
which means to close or to shut. In this specific verse, it is used in conjunction with the preposition baw.
Which means what?
It means upon or behind. Halpern unpacks this grammatical construction brilliantly. He notes that in every single biblical case where this specific verb and preposition combination is used, the object of the preposition is shut inside the structure.
Wait, hold on. If the strict grammatical structure of ancient Hebrew demands that the action means locking something from the inside,
Yes.
then Ehud didn't step out of the room and pull the doors shut behind him. He locked himself inside the Aliyah with a bleeding dead king.
That is exactly what the grammar demands. He locked himself in.
But the guards are standing right outside the wooden screen in the main portico.
They are literally feet away.
If he's locked inside an elevated platform room, how is this a successful intelligence operation? He's completely trapped in a box with his target.
This raises a massive question, and it is the exact suspenseful cliffhanger the ancient text wants the listener to experience.
Okay, so Ehud is locked inside the Aliyah with a massive corpse. The king's heavily armed security detail is just a few yards away. How does he get out?
But before we can explain his impossible escape, we actually have to solve a psychological mystery.
Which is?
Why didn't the guards immediately break down the door when they realized it was locked during the middle of the workday?
Which leads us directly into what has to be the strangest, most fascinating, and frankly, the most humorous linguistic puzzle of the entire biblical narrative.
It really is.
It's the ancient scatology, the bathroom humor that literally saved the operative's life.
Ancient scatology and the unbreakable laws of royal decorum.
So, when the guards in the portico realize the doors of the Aliyah have been locked, they do not panic.
No, they don't assume an assassination has taken place.
Instead, they make a very specific cultural assumption. In the polite terms of traditional English translations, they assume King Eglon is covering his feet or performing the offices of nature.
Covering his feet. Let's dig deeply into that euphemism, because the ancient Israelites and the broader cultures of the Near East had a very strict, highly sensitive cultural approach to these specific bodily functions, didn't they?
They absolutely did. The Hebrew root word functioning here is S-K-H-E, which primarily means to overshadow or to screen. In this idiom, the phrase literally translates to cover one's feet, with the word feet functioning as the direct object of the reflexive verb.
So it is an ancient euphemism for defecation.
Yes, derived from the way long robes would drape and cover the feet when a person squatted.
Which makes sense visually.
We see this exact same idiom used elsewhere in the historical texts. For example, in 1 Samuel 24, verse 3, King Saul goes into a cave in the wilderness of En-Gedi specifically to cover his feet, which is when David secretly cuts off a corner of his robe.
So it's a known idiom, but there's a highly specific grammatical nuance used here in the story of Eglon that explains why the guards waited so incredibly long, isn't there?
Right. It has to do with the fact that Eglon is described early in the text as a very large, heavily corpulent man.
That's a crucial detail. In the story of Saul in the cave, the verb is used in the infinite construct form. But here, regarding King Eglon, the text shifts and uses the hifil participle form of the verb.
The hifil participle, what does that signify?
In Hebrew grammar, a participle indicates an ongoing, continuous action.
Oh.
The guards are standing outside thinking, the king is a very large, corpulent man. He has locked the doors to relieve himself, and because of his size and health, this is going to be a prolonged, continuous process.
Wow. The grammar itself implies a time-consuming event, which gives them a logical reason not to interrupt.
Exactly. Okay, so the guards assume he's using the toilet. But was the Aliyah just a standard room where a servant brought in a ceramic chamber pot, or is there more to the architecture of this specific space?
You brought a scholar named Joel in the source material who has done an entire scatological exegesis of this passage.
Yes. Joel's work here is incredibly illuminating. He focuses his analysis on the Hebrew word makera, which modifies Aliyah. Remember how older commentators translated the whole phrase as cool roof chamber? That translation was derived by linking makera to the root verb kurar'ar, meaning to cool,
Right.
but Joel aligns with the architectural reality of Stagger and Halpern, arguing that the root is not kurar, but rather kurar'ar, which means to meet, to happen, or to befall.
So it translates to the place of happening. That sounds like a euphemism in itself.
It is. In antiquity, just as in English today, rooms in a house were often named for their primary function. A bedroom is for beds, a dining room is for dining, a bathroom is for baths.
Right.
Joel argues convincingly that makura, meaning the place of happening, is a direct, polite euphemism for a toilet chamber.
So when the text says Ehud followed Eglon into the Aliyah Hamkara, he wasn't following him onto a breezy roof.
No, he followed him into the private royal toilet chamber constructed over the floor beams.
The idea that this ancient sacred text is using layered euphemisms for a toilet is fascinating. But it makes me wonder, were euphemisms like this common in the broader biblical text? Was this a standard way of speaking about something culturally taboo?
It was very common because the ancient Israelites maintained a deep cultural respect for privacy and ritual purity regarding bodily fluids and toilet activity.
Which we see codified in their legal texts.
Right, such as Deuteronomy 23 verses 10 through 13, which legislates strict hygiene and the burying of bodily emissions outside the military camp.
The language used there is very careful and euphemistic.
We also see this kind of scatological language used as a weapon of mockery.
Oh, like when?
In 1 Kings 18:27, when the prophet Elijah is taunting the pagan prophets of Baal because their God isn't sending down fire, Elijah suggests several reasons why Baal might be ignoring them.
Oh, right.
He uses the Hebrew word saya, which means to dig a hole or to retreat. Elijah is essentially mocking them on a public stage by shouting, "Maybe your God can't hear your prayers," because he's stepped away to dig a hole and relieve himself.
Oh, wow. So it's a deeply ingrained cultural trope to use this language.
Oh.
But let's ground this psychologically and physically. If I'm listening to this, I have to ask, did indoor plumbing even exist back then? We're talking about the 14th century BC. If Eglon is in a royal toilet chamber, what does that actually look like in the ancient Near East?
It's a completely fair question. While indoor toilets were virtually non-existent for the general peasant population in the ancient Near East, they are exceptionally well attested in the palatial elite structures.
Like the Bitlani palaces we've been discussing.
Exactly. The absolute peak of wealthy elite architecture featured them. To give you a concrete archaeological example from the region, excavators have unearthed 2 iron 2-stone toilet seats in the city of David in ancient Jerusalem.
Real stone toilet seats.
Yes. Both of these carved stone seats were situated within enclosed private chambers, and crucially, they were positioned directly over deep constructed cesspits.
I want to connect this directly to you, the listener, trying to picture this scene in your mind's eye.
Go for it.
Ehud, the left-handed operative, strikes King Eglon down while the king is either on or standing right next to the royal commode in this elevated chamber.
Right.
Ehud leaves the weapon in the body, steps back, and locks the heavy doors from the inside. The guards are sitting just yards away out in the pillared portico.
And they hear absolutely nothing.
They hear nothing. They see a locked door. But their cultural conditioning, their deeply ingrained respect for royal decorum, and the absolute taboo regarding royal privacy during bathroom activities totally paralyzes them.
They dare not knock.
They dare not ask if the king is okay. Ehud analyzed their standard operating procedures, and he literally weaponized their own cultural manners and politeness against them to buy himself a window of time.
And buying that time is the most critical element of the operation, because Ehud is still physically trapped.
Right. He locked the doors from the inside to delay the guards, which means he is still locked inside the Aliyah with a bleeding corpse.
He has the head start, but he desperately needs an exfiltration route. The front door is obviously blocked by the heavily armed security detail.
Which brings us to the escape phase. The guards are distracted by decorum, but Ehud is trapped in a box. It's time to get out of the palace and out of Jericho. How in the world does he do it?
The answer to the escape route lies in one highly mysterious, fiercely debated Hebrew word found in Judges 3:23. Misdaron.
Misparon.
Traditionally, older commentators translated this word as vestibule or porch.
And because of that translation, they suggested that Ehud simply unlocked the door, blithely smiled at the guards as he stepped out onto the porch, and walked out the front gate.
Which, if we apply an ounce of forensic logic, makes 0 sense.
0 sense. He has just eviscerated a massively corpulent king. He would be absolutely covered in blood.
Completely covered.
Furthermore, we just established through the grammar of Hira that he locked the door from the inside specifically to delay them. He can't just unlock it, stroll past a dozen trained bodyguards dripping in blood, and give them a polite nod.
Exactly. The logic of a front door exit collapses instantly, so we have to deconstruct this word, Mysteron.
Let's do it.
Older scholarship, like that of Burney, linked it to the root SDR, which means to arrange in order or a row of pillars. Hence, they arrived at porch.
Right.
But newer, much more rigorous linguistic scholarship links Mysteron to a completely different root word, Sadira.
Okay, let's unpack Sadira. What does that root mean in this context?
Sadira means to be blinded or to be puzzled. It denotes something that is entirely hidden from sight. When applied in an architectural context, it means the hidden place.
The hidden place.
Specifically, it refers to the hidden enclosed space beneath the floor beams of a structure.
Let me put the pieces together here.
Good.
The hidden space beneath the floor beams. Wait,
Ah.
we just established that the Aliyah was the royal toilet chamber built on an elevated platform over the floor beams.
Yes.
So if the hidden space is directly beneath the toilet...
Yes. The hidden space underneath was the cesspit.
Oh, wow.
In these Bit Halani Palace layouts, the cesspit located under the royal toilet had to be regularly accessed and cleaned out by servants or orderlies.
Right, someone has to empty it.
This was usually done through a small access point or shaft near the foundation, completely separate from the main audience hall. As one archaeological scholar rather bluntly summarized the physics of the room, what the king deposited from above can only have fallen through the floor.
That is wow.
Eglon's throne in this specific moment was a commode, and the Mysteron, the hidden place, was the shaft leading straight down into the cesspit.
So what does this all mean for our operative? It means Ehud didn't walk out the front door and wave at the guards.
He definitely did not.
He executed a grueling, absolutely disgusting, but perfectly planned covert exfiltration through the palace's plumbing system.
He squeezed down through the toilet opening, dropped into the royal cesspit, navigated through the physical waste in the pitch black, and escaped through the orderly's access hatch on the outside of the palace walls.
Completely unseen by the guards.
It is the ultimate greedy exfiltration. And while Ehud is physically dragging himself through a literal cesspit to secure his escape, the guards are still sitting comfortably outside the wooden screen in the portico.
The text in Judges 3:25 gives us a brilliant, almost darkly comedic insight into their mindset, doesn't it?
It does. It says the courtiers waited Bosch.
Bosh. What is the literal translation of that emotional state?
Well, some older English Bibles translate it rather mildly, as they waited until they were at a loss.
But a much more accurate rendering of the psychological state of Bosch, which the NIV actually captures quite well, is to the point of embarrassment.
They waited for so incredibly long that they started looking at each other, deeply embarrassed and uncomfortable.
They are thinking, is the king okay? Has he fallen asleep on the toilet? Is he unwell?
We shouldn't interrupt him, but this is getting ridiculous.
The sheer excruciating length of time they waited, out of strict cultural politeness, gave Ehud the massive, undisputed head start he needed.
He needed to not only wash himself and escape the immediate perimeter, but to get completely out of the city of Jericho and safely cross the Jordan River.
That is just phenomenal. The sheer audacity of the plan is staggering.
It really is.
Let's zoom out from the microscopic forensic details of this. Escape the linguistics of the toilet, the architecture of the cesspit, the biomechanics of the left-handed strike, and let's look at the macro impact on the nation of Israel.
Yes, the aftermath.
What is the immediate aftermath of this intelligence operation?
By the time the guards finally overcome their deep cultural embarrassment, force open the locked doors, and find King Eglon dead on the floor of the Aliyah, Ehud is long gone.
He makes it safely back to the hill country of Ephraim.
He immediately blows the trumpet, signaling a mass uprising and rallying the Israelite militias. Because he took out the absolute head of the serpent, the entire Moabite military command structure in Jericho is thrown into chaos.
They don't have a king to issue orders.
Ehud leads the Israelites down from the hills to cut off the fords of the Jordan River, effectively trapping the occupying Moabite army inside Israelite territory with no way to retreat home.
The text notes that they routed and killed 10,000 Moabite troops at the river, and it describes them specifically as all robust and valiant.
These weren't weak conscripts. This was an elite, hardened, occupying force.
But they were completely leaderless, psychologically shattered, and outmaneuvered by a single operative who changed the rules of engagement.
Precisely. And the geopolitical result of this single, perfectly executed covert operation was 80 years of peace for the land.
That is 2 entire generations of freedom, stability, and economic recovery. All because one operative saw a vulnerability in the enemy's system and had the tactical skill set to exploit it.
Which brings us to the profound application for today, because we aren't just examining an ancient thriller for entertainment. This is a masterclass in strategy.
How can you, listening to this deep dive right now, how can current leaders, executives, or strategists apply these ancient lessons to modern challenges?
To me, the entire operation boils down to 2 critical concepts: discernment and patience.
I completely agree with that assessment. Think about the discernment involved. Ehud didn't just rally an ill-equipped, untrained peasant army and charge the front gates of a Bitalani palace.
That would have been tactical suicide against 10,000 robust, heavily armed Moabites.
Instead, he used critical discernment.
Yeah.
He relentlessly analyzed his enemy. He understood the exact architectural layout of the palace he was infiltrating.
And he found his asymmetrical advantage, his left-handedness, his ITER training, and he heavily leveraged it.
He didn't view it as a quirk or a disability. He viewed it as a highly specific weapon against the Guard's standard operating procedures.
He understood the cultural blind spots of his enemy. He knew that using generic religious terminology, saying Elohim instead of Yahweh, would flatter a narcissistic king's ego and lower his guard.
He knew that the Guard's strict cultural decorum regarding the royal toilet would utterly paralyze them from taking action when the doors were locked.
He didn't fight their strengths. He weaponized their own culture, their own arrogance, and their own politeness against them.
And executing a plan with that level of precision required immense, agonizing patience.
Think about the 18 years of suffocating oppression the people endured. The deliverance, when it finally came, was surgical and precise. But the waiting period was incredibly long.
Whether you are an ancient operative plotting an infiltration or a modern leader navigating today's incredibly complex world of information overload and corporate strategy, critical thinking is essential.
Questioning the standard operating procedure, refusing to just play by the binary rules the opponent has set up, searching for the blind spots in the armor, that is how you find the breakthrough.
It's about refusing to accept this simplistic, binary fable. We started this deep dive talking about how modern readers often approach ancient texts with an expectation of mythic simplicity. We want 2-dimensional moral stories.
But through the lens of deep linguistics and dirt under the fingernails, archaeology digging into words like Sippy, Iter, Aliyah, and Mysteron,
And cross-referencing them with Garstang's excavations in Jericho and the Iron Two toilets of the City of David.
right, we see that the Book of Judges isn't a collection of crude campfire stories. It is a precise, historically grounded, incredibly gritty and complex record of real human conflict.
And if we look even deeper, there is a profound theological dimension to this that connects to the broader redemptive history.
Oh, absolutely. This goes all the way back to Genesis 3:15.
Right, the promise of the woman's seed.
After the fall in Eden, God promises that the seed of the woman would eventually crush the head of the serpent.
And throughout the Old Testament narrative, we see these cyclical echoes of that promise, these deliverers who rise up to strike the head of the oppressor.
Ehud literally strikes the head of the serpent in this scenario. King Eglon is the oppressive, tyrannical force suffocating God's people.
And Ehud, stepping into that role of the deliverer, executes judgment and brings freedom.
But he also points forward. Ehud is a flawed human deliverer operating in a dark time, but his actions are a type, a shadow, pointing forward to the ultimate seed of the woman.
The final deliverer, who wouldn't just bring 80 years of peace, but eternal deliverance by completely crushing the ultimate serpent.
Exactly. The high concentration of rare, unique, and highly specific architectural and anatomical vocabulary in these few short verses of Judges isn't an accident, and it isn't myth-making.
It is the undeniable hallmark of a detailed eyewitness-level historical account that recorded the precise mechanics of a specific building, a specific cultural moment, and a specific tactical operation.
And it serves a theological purpose, showing God raising up deliverance from the most unexpected places, an occupied people, a left-handed man, using a hidden weapon.
I want to sincerely thank you, the listener, for joining us on this extensive exploration today. We've waded through the mud of ancient linguistics, we've deciphered architectural blueprints of Bitalani palaces, and yes, we've even explored 14th century BC plumbing.
All to uncover the gritty, brilliant reality of Ehud's operation.
It serves as a powerful reminder that the past is far more complex, far more ingenious, and far more human than we often give it credit for.
True.
And so, we leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. If a bizarre, seemingly melodramatic story about a left-handed assassin, a hidden sword, and a locked bathroom door turned out to contain a perfectly accurate architectural blueprint of a Canaanite palace and a flawless masterclass in ancient covert ops.
What other myths or simple fables in our ancient texts are actually detailed? Complex historical records just waiting for the forensic muddy waters to clear and for modern archaeology to finally catch up and translate them correctly.